What's going on, guys? It's Nick here, back in the video. Today we're looking at ECR, which is the average industry expert consensus rankings, seeing which early and mid-round wide receivers I think the industry has ranked incorrectly. We'll start things off with Michael Pittman Jr. Now, given my love for the Colts offense this season, I think it's going to shock a lot of people to see that I actually think the industry is too high on Pittman right now. ECR has him at 16, my rankings wide receiver 21, and the reasoning here is sort of simple. Yes, I love Anthony Richardson and the Colts offense, but I love Richardson because of his rushing upside, right? He could run for 15 touchdowns, he could run for a ton of yards. On top of that, that's obviously great for where you're getting him in fantasy, but it actually hurts Pittman because if Richardson's running 15 touchdowns, well, he's not throwing for those 15 touchdowns. Jonathan Taylor, really like him because, those touchdowns can kind of be taken away from him on the ground, but it's also going to open up a lot of running lanes, so he could be highly efficient on the ground. And if they're just a great running offense, a great offense in general, this touchdowns can still be there for him. But teams are just going to have a brutal time stopping Jonathan Taylor when they also have to worry about Anthony Richardson keeping the ball on the handoff. I like Downs because, he's their cheapest wide receiver. He's still I think very underrated. I think he's just a very, very good wide receiver that probably underperformed a little bit as a rookie, but I think, people maybe just don't understand how good he is. A great chance of racking up receptions from the slot. I've said for a while now that I think A.D. Mitchell might be slightly overrated by the community simply because some people think he's can't bust. He could certainly bust, but on the flip side, there are a lot of people who really like his talent, really like him as a prospect. He very obviously does have upside. So I like this team because you kind of work around their sleepers at tight ends, but it's you work around this team, and there are a lot of different players that could be very, very good. It's why I think they're going to be a really strong offense and why I love Richardson. So while Pittman is still the clear number one wide receiver on the team, the passing volume overall is a little bit capped with Richardson at quarterback. They've discussed how they want to spread the ball around, and so there will be games where Pittman has 10, 11 receptions. I think that'll happen. I don't want to say a ton of times this season, but I think multiple times this season, he's going to have double-digit receptions. So he's still going to have that weekly ceiling. I just think it's going to be a little bit more up and down because there will be games where Jonathan Taylor takes off, where Richardson and Taylor combine for all the touchdowns, where Downs has a great game, where Mitchell has a great game. And so there's going to be fewer times where, Pittman has the spikes. And so, again, love the offense as a whole, but wide receiver 16 is a little bit early right now. I would rather gain my exposure through JT, but really through Richardson, and I would say Downs is my other favorite on this offense. I think low 20s makes more sense. Wide receiver 16 for Pittman. A wide receiver I like more than consensus is Tank Dell. Dell is wide receiver 31 by ECR, 26 on Underdog, wide receiver 25 in my rankings. Now, he has elite chemistry with Stroud, and while they added Diggs this offseason, I don't think that's as bad of a move for Tank Dell in fantasy as a lot of people are assuming, how the industry is assuming. Diggs is coming off his worst season as a member of the Bills, and while he's not at the age cliff yet, I would say for a wide receiver, the age cliff that we're really worried about is 33. That's pump the brakes. The wheels could really fall off at this point. 32 is a little hesitant. Diggs is going to be 31 in November. So approaching, but not quite there yet. Now, if you've been following my videos this offseason, you know that my general reasoning for liking Dell in drafts is more strategy based than anything. I truly do not know who is going to be the most fantasy relevant wide receiver on the Texans offense this season. I don't know. But I do know that Tank Dell is by far going the latest in drafts. And I also know that our only evidence, our only sample size was Tank Dell being more valuable than Nico Collins last season while the two of them were healthy. And then, Nico went off, obviously, when you had Tank Dell injured. But what, are we going to sit here and say that the opposite couldn't have happened? Let's say Nico was the one that got hurt. are we saying it's impossible that while they were both healthy, Dell was more valuable, then Nico gets hurt and Dell goes off later in the season? Like, that could have easily happened. If it had happened, Tank Dell would be a second round pick right now, which is kind of where Nico is going at that turn. But given that Dell was a rookie, if you saw that explosion, I guarantee you he'd be going in round 2 right now. But it was Dell that got hurt, Nico that went off in his absence, and so now Nico's going way earlier in drafts. Then you've got Diggs also going earlier, but, as I said, kind of approaching that age cliff. Wide receiver changing teams doesn't mean he's going to bust, but it just adds in a little bit of risk, a little bit of unknown, just not knowing if everything's going to translate on their offense. So I think the overall point is we don't know. We do not know who is going to be most valuable on this offense this season. But the very little data that we do have, at least with Nico and Dell, was that Dell was more valuable, and yet he's going later in drafts. And then a little bit of qualitative data for you. I think a lot of people saw that clip circulating on Twitter during the podcast. Stroud was asked to just field a team. You got to convert a game-winning play. I think they went with 4th and 5 or something. He said, field a team, active players. Who do you want on offense? Obviously, Stroud being the quarterback in that one. Stroud put Tank Dell in his 3 wide receiver set next to Adams and Jamar Chase. Again, probably means nothing. Just a bit of qualitative data to throw out there. But we've 100% seen examples of quarterbacks being super close with wide receivers, and that duo elevating past anyone's expectations. Think back to the Cooper Kupp breakfast narrative with Matthew Stafford. We've got Jalen Hurts and A.J. Brown being best friends before A.J. Brown was even drafted. And so then him joining the Eagles, he goes off. We have Carr and Adams being really close friends, college teammates. He gets 180 targets when he joins the team. So I'm not saying Dell's going to have 180 targets or anywhere near that, but we have seen what can happen in recent years when a quarterback has a connection with a wide receiver, and Stroud objectively is very close with Tank Dell. So for him to be by far the lowest ranked among these 3 is just a little bit odd to me. They truly should be going back to back to back when the only data we have is that Dell was more valuable last season than Nico together. Also, someone mentioned in a previous video, they're like, I get it, but I can't take him. He's coming off a torn ACL. He's not. He didn't tear his ACL. He fractured his fibula. He is 100% recovered. So don't worry about the Dell injury last season. Fully recovered from that. He's out there at OTAs. He's totally fine. Don't worry about the injury last season. Another wide receiver I'm ahead of consensus on is Marquise Brown. Hollywood is the wide receiver 37 by ECR, 34 in Underdog, my wide receiver 33. So not a huge difference, but this is one that I want to just stay a little bit ahead of consensus on. So if consensus starts to rise a few spots, I'm going to rise a few spots as well. I just think the community is a little bit too low on him. He's not an X receiver, right? He's not going to step in there and take the Tyreek Hill role. Throw that out. He's not going to be a top 3 wide receiver this season, just being a featured weapon on this offense. It's not going to happen. But he is very strong over the middle of the field, and I can promise you he's an upgrade over Hardman and MVS. Kansas City has been really trying to figure out their deep wide receiver since losing Tyreek Hill. It's been 2 seasons. They've really just been unable to do so. 2022, they gave MVS and Hardman a combined 115 targets. Last season, they didn't really try and focus on anyone. They tried to give all of Justin Watson, MVS, Tony, Sky Moore, Mecole Hardman, Richie James, Justin Ross a little bit. They tried to give all of them an opportunity. They're like, can someone please do something, ideally downfield, but do something. Get open, be productive in some way. All of them were terrible. None of them stepped up. But that's why they went after Hollywood, why they drafted Xavier Worthy in the draft, because they knew obviously their wide receiver room wasn't it, right? They needed upgrades there, especially when you think to this season. Kelsey's not getting any younger. Kelsey's another year older. He can still do it, but they're going to make an effort to keep him fresh during the season because they know they're making the playoffs. They know they're going to have a Super Bowl run. They want Kelsey fresh and healthy in the playoffs. And so they're not going to force feed him, 10, 11 targets every week. They need their wide receivers to step up. And they just know that on their roster before getting Hollywood and Worthy, They just did not have capable players. So the question really is, does Worthy or Hollywood get more of those deep targets? Those are the really valuable targets on this Kansas City offense, because if you can have someone win that role and be their weapon deep downfield, at least more often, because everyone's going to get looks deep, but the one who's getting most of the looks deep, if you can identify who that's going to be, that's a really valuable role. And I think it's Hollywood. I know that Worthy is fast, but his career yards per deep target in college was extremely low. I think Scott Barrett had it at like the lowest of all like Power 5 wide receivers who got drafted this season, which is, a ton of wide receivers, just the lowest of all of them. That's mildly concerning because you think about college. It's okay, if you're like the fastest wide receiver ever in the NFL, right? Like you're incredibly fast. Don't you think you're a lot faster than your college competition? So shouldn't you have just been able to just go deep and get open all of the time, always beat people? And while the targets weren't great, like the quality of targets will obviously be significantly better, it's just mildly concerning that virtually all of his looks or his touches came on screens and deep passes, but that he was super inefficient on the deep passes. Just something to worry about with Worthy. We also have a very long list, a very long history of the fastest wide receivers at the combine just not being good in the NFL. Justin Ross, Tyquan Thornton, J.J. Nelson, Paris Campbell, Les Jones Jr., Andy Isabella. Like, it's just, they're bad. Like the fastest wide receiver, when you identify the fast wide receiver, it basically always is a bust. And unfortunately, it's an even longer list of smaller wide receivers. They've been hitting more recently, like the quote unquote small wide receiver archetype. But when you look at the smallest of the wide receivers, the 45 lightest wide receivers in BMI since 2000, Devonta Smith is the only one to hit 1,000 receiving yards. So there is a long history of these smaller speed wide receivers simply not working out. And then you look at the profile for Worthy. There are reasons to be concerned. There's reasons to like him too. I don't think he's a guaranteed bust. And we'll talk about a lot of the reasons to like Worthy in future videos. But I think my main point is I don't think Worthy is going to be that consistent deep weapon. I really think it's going to be Marquise Brown this season. And if we know he's going to have that role, I think he's going to be someone you love putting in your flex. That some weeks it's not there, but in the flex spot, it's just like, the ceiling is there, and in the weeks that KC falls behind by a little bit and they become more aggressive downfield, that he has significant weekly upside. I think that's well worth it at his ADP. Shifting back to wide receivers that I think are a little bit overrated right now, Calvin Ridley, ECR wide receiver 33, Underdog 36, my wide receiver 37. I just don't end up with him a ton, and I don't want to rank him at or ahead of ECR or ADP just because I don't really see any sort of ceiling. And you guys know I need to see that ceiling to draft someone. Like, Ridley was in a really good spot last season. The X receiver was walking in as that number one target on the 7th most pass heavy team in the league. And while the Titans this season, of course, joined the Titans in the offseason, while they're going to throw the ball more than last year, we need to understand who the Titans are. Like, they have been bottom 6 in pass attempts 8 consecutive years. They have been below average in pass attempts for 12 consecutive seasons. And with Will Levis at quarterback, my money is on this at least being a situation downgrade. Like, even if you want to say this is the year, right? This is the first year in 8 years they're not going to be bottom 6. First year in 12 years they're not going to be bottom half. My money is still on they're going to throw the ball less than Jacksonville, and that Will Levis is worse than Trevor Lawrence. And so you add that in. You also say, okay, he's joining forces with DeAndre Hopkins, who, despite getting up there in age, is coming off a 29% target share in 2022, 28% target share last season. Like, Hopkins just commands targets. That's what he does. There's no reason to think that's going to stop this season. You add in 2 pass-catching running backs. You add in Boyd and has improved number 3. Like, it's just hard to envision a world where Ridley has any sort of target ceiling unless there's like a ton of injuries on offense, and that's not what you want to do. Like, a lot of people could say that about, right? It's like, oh yeah, if everyone gets hurt, he has a high target share. So does everyone. Like, I don't want to have to worry about that when we're in the 30s, the low 30s for wide receivers. I would like my wide receiver to be able to produce, to have a great season without mass injury. So I'm going to remain behind ECR and ADP with Ridley. Final player over today. Also think is being drafted too high. Mike Williams, wide receiver 51 by ACR, 52 by ADP. My wide receiver 61. Mike tore his ACL back in week 3 last season. So while that's enough time, to be back in week 1, my main concern isn't him being back, right? Being on the field. It's more how good is he going to be when he's on the field? He was 29 years old when he tore his ACL, and the cutoff is typically like 25, 26. So if someone tears it, 25 or 26 or younger, you shouldn't have too many concerns unless it was a massive one, right? Like something like Javonte Williams when he had, multiple ligaments also torn. Good note on Mike Williams. It was only the ACL. But in general, under 25, 26, you're not too concerned. You think that following season they can come back, kind of be what they were before the injury. Over that, 27, 28, 29, turning 30 this season, there are a lot more concerns that maybe you're not really going to reach what you were until the following year. So maybe it takes Mike Williams this season to kind of like get going, and then next year he can return. But also next year he'll be 31. And so it is possible we kind of like never see him get back to exactly what he was before. So that's one concern, just that he's turning 30 and the recovery from the ACL just is a little bit unpredictable at this age. But also think about the offense. Like Garrett Wilson is the unquestioned wide receiver 1 on this team, going to have a huge target share. Breece Hall, obviously going to have a higher target share than the vast majority of running backs. They also love Xavier Gibson, someone we're going to talk about in a few days. They drafted Malachi Corley to be kind of like a gadget player, not someone who's going to command a huge target share, but someone who they're going to scheme looks to each week. And so you kind of start jumping around, and you go from the Jets, who everyone in their mind is like, oh, the Jets have no one, right? So anyone can step in, command a target share, to, well, they actually kind of have people, and it's not like we expect Rodgers to drop back 40 times a game. Like it's still going to be, Aaron Rodgers' offenses are slower paced. They are, more, I'm going to walk up to the line. I'm going to let the clock drip at 3 seconds on the play clock. That's when I'm going to snap it when I've identified everything. So you don't lead to a lot of games with a ton of passing volume. Great defense, and so that also doesn't lead to a lot of passing volume. And so you start working through everything, and you realize how much they actually like their wide receiver 3 and 4, and how much they're going to throw to the running backs. And you're like, what sort of upside does Mike Williams have? Even if he was 100% healthy, now he's not healthy. There's that risk. It's like, until someone can go out there in camp in like August and tell me he looks exactly like he did in the past, I just don't see how it is worth taking him at 51. And what I've basically noticed on Underdog, where he's like kind of going at that 51 spot, it's basically like you get to this point where all the elite running backs are gone. You've kind of exited the range of elite quarterbacks. Tight ends are kind of meh. And so people kind of gravitate towards wide receiver, and he's just a name that kind of sticks out. And if you project him as roughly a wide receiver 2 on this team, that is in general where he projects. So I think that's basically why he's going in that range. If people just assume he's the 2, assume he's getting a decent target share, assuming no real dip from previous production, they see his name in that spot and they're like, well, I don't like anyone else, so I'll take Williams. And that is not what you want to do in fantasy. You don't want to take someone just because you're not in love with the other names. I think we just got to kind of figure out some names in that range. And I've just dropped him past that range so that we just don't end up with him. But I think it's more about figuring out who we like in that range, not being like, well, I don't like some of these options, so I might as well take Mike Williams. No, don't take Mike Williams. Let's figure out some other names. So I have the same video coming out on Saturday for the running backs, and then Friday's gonna be that sleeper video where we're gonna talk about some players going really late in drafts that I think we take shots on. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure the bell icon is clicked so you don't miss out on either of those videos. Also, if you want access to my full ranking, you see that on my website, thefantasyfootballadvice.com, or you can sign up for your first Underdog account today using promo code FFA, make a minimum $10 deposit, and you'll get my rankings for free. That, my friends, is in this one, and thanks for watching.